In Russia, a rebellion against Vladimir Putin is beginning to grow, demanding an end to the war against Ukraine. Otherwise, Russia faces social unrest that the Kremlin will not be able to handle. Something happened in the Russian State Duma that seemed impossible just a year ago. Vladimir Putin faced a rare public demand from the State Duma to present a real plan to end the war against Ukraine. The State Duma asked Putin to explain how the war will end, reveal the plan, and clarify our direction. These claims about denazification, demilitarization, and Nazis are nonsense. Even the most unwashed Russians are starting to realize it. A phrase was spoken from the State Duma podium that, not so long ago, could have landed you a criminal case in Russia. The country is on the verge of a social explosion. People need to be shown a clear plan for ending the war, because no one understands. Where is Vladimir Putin leading Russia? That's the kind of thing they're starting to say from the State Duma podium. Let's figure it out. My name is Alexei Pechi. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write any comment you like. So, today, in the State Duma of the Russian Federation, the deputy from the Communist Party, Vyacheslav Markayev, publicly demanded that Vladimir Putin present a real plan to end the war against Ukraine. In his speech, he listed everything that is eating Russia from the inside: corruption scandals, oligarchy, and the loss, as he put it, of the most active and reproductively capable part of the population. Well, what he means are those Russian guys killed in the war against Ukraine, who for some reason went to fight, ended up dying on the holy Ukrainian land, and their remains are still there, rotting, unwanted by anyone. The Communist Party deputy claims Russia lost its most active reproductive population segment. Honestly, I don't feel sorry for them. Россия потеряла. And he says that there is a huge problem with Ukrainian drone strikes, and that we shouldn't pretend that everything is fine. Well, and then this Communist Party deputy said the main thing, quote, "The time for illusions is over. The country is on the verge of a social explosion." And he added that the blame for this will fall precisely on the entrenched ruling power embodied by Vladimir Putin's regime. If the situation does not change, he says, social unrest and chaos will only become more likely, and the West will inevitably take advantage of this. And Markayev is not alone here. The fact is, he is just continuing the list of public figures who are moving away from the official Putin line. At the end of May, another deputy from the same party, Renat Suleimanov, called for a speedy end to the war, stating that the economy would not withstand its continuation. And even earlier, a former staunch Kremlin supporter, the so-called Z propagandist Ilya Remeslo, turned against Putin, calling the Russian president a war criminal and a thief. And when such voices begin to be heard in the State Duma, it's no longer just a coincidence, it's a certain symptom of changes in society. Then Vladimir Putin himself started admitting the problems, showing he recognizes real tension in society. It's no longer possible to tell fairy tales about victories to unwashed Russians. Putin admitted that the Russian army is not advancing as quickly as he would like, but still, every day it is gradually making progress at the front. Next is a quote from the bald, stinky dwarf Vladimir Putin. "Everything is working out for us. Progress is slower than we want, but we move forward daily, gradually controlling our territories. That's how it will be. We will achieve this. No one should have any doubts about this." Well, I mean, like, he's saying there shouldn't be any doubts, and a few more hundred Russian Ivans will die in the war against Ukraine. Well, and maybe we'll get somewhere. But as we can see, doubts remain. But here the question arises, why is the foundation of Putin's regime cracking? Where are these voices coming from? Well, firstly, because the Russian economy is going into a tailspin. Growth has practically stopped, inflation remains high, and Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries and terminals have seriously cut Moscow's budget. The thing is, according to official data, oil production has dropped to a 16-year low. The figures for military spending look frightening, even for the Kremlin itself. At the beginning of 2026, military spending increased by more than 30% year-on-year and reached 46% of all budget expenditures. And compared to the revenues of the Russian Federation's budget, the picture is even harsher. From January to March, military spending was equivalent to 2/3 of Russia's budget revenues. That means, in fact, every second ruble from the federal budget goes to the war. Just think about it. 2/3 of budget revenues go to the war. 2/3. That's not 30%, that's 2/3. But signals of panic are already coming from the very top of the financial system. Independent Russian channels, citing sources, report central bank head Elvira Nabiullina gave Putin an ultimatum. Поставила Путину ультиматум. Will finish her term only if the Kremlin does not close the borders and does not impose martial law. She allegedly said that if this happens, the economy will collapse, and she doesn't want any part of it. According to the channel We Can Explain, Nabiullina is allegedly planning to resign soon. And this week, she and her deputies even skipped a meeting with Putin and the ministers about interest rates. And as you understand, when the head of the central bank distances herself from the top official, meaning Vladimir Putin, it's not just a technical disagreement. This is real politics. So she understands that everything is just going downhill, and she's trying to escape this sinking ship, but they're not letting her go. And the main ratings are falling too. The state-run VT Siam is stopping the publication of Putin's public trust rating this week because it has dropped to its lowest point since the start of the full-scale war. In early April, President Vladimir Putin was named among the politicians trusted by only 29.5% of Russians. After that, the publication of the polls was mysteriously stopped. And they say, why do you need this? Can you imagine? They just tell Russians, well, we're not going to do anything about the falling ratings. Why? Why should Putin do anything for the unwashed Russians? Let's just remove these ratings, that's all. What difference does it make how many people trust or don't trust Putin? This is Russia. It's a wild herd. What difference does it make? Well, let's say 90 Russians come out and say they don't trust Putin. Do you think they'll do anything? No, they won't do anything. They'll just be sent off to die in the war, that's all. That's all of Russia for you. And that's when Ukrainian intelligence comes in with their trump card. Zelensky said today that Ukrainian intelligence services have gained access to secret documents that end up on Vladimir Putin's desk. We're talking about the Kremlin leader's approval rating and the dissatisfaction of Russians with his actions. Zelensky put it this way: Vladimir Putin is rarely given completely truthful, unembellished information, but even what he does receive allows certain conclusions to be drawn, and the conclusion is frightening for the Kremlin. The so-called projected indicators of Russians' dissatisfaction will continue to rise steadily, and Putin is already being prepared for the idea that this growth cannot be stopped, and it will not level off, all the way until September, when parliamentary elections are scheduled in Russia. Intelligence agencies are also reporting a significant rise in protest sentiment in the regions, and that leads to Zelensky's most striking statement. It is possible that the peace agreement will have to be made not with Vladimir Putin. Does the war itself change because of this? According to the Times, yes, it is changing. A turning point has emerged, though with some reservations. The basis of Kyiv's optimism is an assessment. The assessment is that Ukraine is now killing or permanently disabling more soldiers than Russia can recruit. Ukrainian military intelligence estimates enemy losses at about 30,000 per month. The pressure is high, and in a few months, Russian losses could very well exceed the number of new recruits. But it's too early to call this a turning point. FPV drones now dominate the battlefield. Ukraine has doubled its drone production target, and the shutdown of Starlink for Russia has given Kyiv a unique advantage in the 50 to 200 kilometers zone. That is, these are medium-range strikes. But here is the key paradox that still doesn't let us relax. Despite this grumbling in the State Duma, the falling approval rating, and the rebellious central bank, Vladimir Putin is not changing his course. On June 12, he signed a decree to increase the army by almost 10,000 people. This is already the second such expansion of the Russian army in the last 4 months. Public opinion, as has long been clear, does not affect him in any way. He has shown a willingness to sacrifice simply hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers. And he absolutely doesn't care about them. That's what I said. Well, Russians might be dissatisfied. So what? Nothing will happen. And Ukraine senses the moment, and that's why it's going all in. And according to Politico, Kyiv is asking its allies for an additional $20 billion to secure this advantage. The wording of the Ukrainian official is extremely candid. Russia is burning, literally burning, and Kyiv wants it to burn even more. But for that, funding is needed, so that all these drones and missiles flying over Russia, so that there are dozens of times as many of them. So Russia is just engulfed in flames. So yes, a rebellion in the State Duma is real. The brink of a social explosion is already being discussed openly. In Russia, that's important. But as long as this subhuman, this creature, this loser Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin only hears himself, well, this threshold remains just words, nothing more. Let me emphasize this point once again. Even if 90 Russians are dissatisfied, this herd will do nothing. Hoping that Russians will rebel and take to the streets in protest is complete nonsense. I remember the beginning of the full-scale war, and many people in Ukraine were hoping for this. Even President Zelensky addressed the Russians. He spoke with Russian journalists, saying like, "What are you doing? You understand how this will all turn out," and so on and so on. It had no effect at all. Well, Russians either run away from this dump called Russia, or they support Vladimir Putin's regime. And I'll add a couple of my own thoughts. I recently came across a certain comment from Russians who live abroad. And they say, how are we supposed to build a dialogue with Ukrainians? How are we supposed to communicate with Ukrainians abroad? Like, well, we didn't choose this war. Look, I left Russia as soon as the war started. I left Russia and now I don't live in Russia. So I'm not a Putin supporter. I have nothing to do with this. It's not my war. That's all complete nonsense. In response to this, the first question that comes to my mind is, why do Russians want so badly to communicate with Ukrainians abroad? Why? Well, there are objectively more of you, just in terms of numbers. Even, you see, in your own story. Shells, stop bothering Ukrainians. For years, these Russians have been saying how we're brothers, how we're friends. Just leave us alone. Just get off our backs. Just leave Ukrainians alone, that's all. We don't need your friendship. We don't need anything from you. Another thing is when Russians say, we didn't choose this war. Listen, for 20 years before the full-scale war, you chose Vladimir Putin. After 2014, none of you condemned it. No one condemned the annexation of Crimea. No one condemned the massacre in Donbass that Russians started by sending Russians there to fight against Ukraine. None of you demanded that Vladimir Putin leave Ukraine alone during protests. No one did anything to prevent this war. And you ran away from Russia at the beginning of the full-scale war just to save your own skin, to save your own ass. Nothing more. Really, nothing more than that. If you were given a guarantee that you could live peacefully in Russia, that you wouldn't be mobilized, fined, or bothered, yeah, no one would have run anywhere, so there's no need. That's all. These are complete lies that Russians abroad are trying to spread and fool Ukrainians with. And those who left saying like, we're good, we're not like that. After all, Putin has been in power for 26 years. Have you not been choosing this for 26 years or what? Share your thoughts in the comments below this episode. And Ukrainians, I know that Russians, unfortunately to my great regret, unwashed Russians, still come and watch these episodes. I have a question for you. Why? What do you want here? My advice to you, pack your things and get out of here. Today I'm emotional, but I will say everything I think and how I really think. I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode as usual. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation. Links and payment details, including Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon, are in the description. There are even links to crypto wallets and bank details. Basically, whatever is convenient for you, just choose. I would appreciate any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.